This is Polyamory Weekly, number 29 for October 11th, 2005. Coming up on this week's show, more poly resources, how not to be a slut, poly singers, that's singers, not swingers, and an interview with Rat Bastard on breaking up is hard to do. All coming up on this week's show. Hello and welcome to Polyamory Weekly, episode 29. For our under 18 listeners, this is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit www.scarletteen.com. For everyone else, this is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. We are dedicated to the issues of loving more in the polyamorous lifestyle, championing and telling tales of the ups, downs, and squicks of the lifestyle. All right, that's enough of that. Wanted to start the show by making a couple of announcements just to make sure that I don't forget them later on. First of all, a new polyamory resource. It's Polyamorous Percolations, and I got an email from the creator of the site. They have a forum, lots of good poly resources, and the website is polyamory.lucerella, that's LUCERELLA.com. And they've actually asked me to do a print interview where I answer various questions about polyamory and the lifestyle and things like that, which I will be contributing very soon. So, yet another polyamorous resource for those of you out there in internet land. Also, in terms of resources, Darkmain wrote in to suggest 2 new tools that he thought would really help poly people. And get this, they're online calendars. So even if your lovers aren't in the same city as you, and me, mine aren't in the same state as me. So they're online calendars that he recommends, www.kiko.com, Kiko.com. and www.planzo, P as in Paul, LANZO.com. They're web-based calendars, and I gotta say, I think that's a really good idea. If my lover Fencer T were a little bit more into doing things on the internet, I think this would be an excellent solution for us. I might suggest our family implementing that anyway, just in case, because we have really darn busy lives. Next announcement. Wanted to make a special call out to, you noticed at the beginning of the show, we always suggest that the under 18 age listeners go to scarletteen.com. And as you may or may not know, Scarlet Teen is not sponsored by the government because she can say pretty much whatever she wants about sex. She can actually tell people the truth. She can tell under 18-year-olds that, abstinence is not the only solution. And she is very honest and upfront about sex advice for our underage people. But because of the fact that she's not sponsored by the government, cash flow for this very, very dedicated woman who runs scarletteen.com tends to ebb and flow from month to month. So if you've already given Hurricane Katrina relief, if you've already given to the Red Cross and everything like that, and you would like to support free, open, honest sex education for children under 18 who are looking for upfront, honest sex advice, please click the donate button at www.scarletteen, that's SCARLETTEEN.com. Also wanted to do a little reminder that I will be participating in the Masturbate-a-thon for Katrina Relief that I mentioned a few shows ago. You can register yourself at touchyourself.org. There is a forum where you can say that you're going to be participating in the Masturbate-a-thon. Should be interesting for me because Fencer T is going to be visiting me that particular weekend. So I'm hoping that actual sex counts as masturbation as well. Maybe if it's just any type of joy in sexuality. But I will be logging the minutes that I spend masturbating, touching myself, and orgasming. And then for those who have pledged a certain amount per minute, then they will be on the honor system that they will then click the donate button and choose the religious or non-religious cause of their choice to donate to Hurricane Katrina relief. So just a little reminder, that's at www.touchyourself.org if you'd like to either pledge for me or sign up yourself and encourage your friends to pledge for your masturbation next weekend. And one last announcement. You heard that I mentioned the Jealousy Conference in Berkeley, California on the last show. Well, the announcement has been updated to say that there are going to be the fabulous polyamorous singers performing in Berkeley on October 15th next weekend. This is the fabulous TES and the God Squad, an amazing group of polyamorous singers and musicians. They'll be making their final appearance in Northern California at the Jealousy Management Conference in Berkeley. The performance is done in association with the 3-day Jealousy Management Conference, but it is technically a separate event, so people not attending the conference may attend the musical performance for just $15. The performance will be from 7 to 8:30 on Saturday evening, October 15th. Location 2525 8th Street, Suite 15 in Berkeley near 8th and Dwight. And for more information, www.worldpolyamoryassociation.com, and check out TES in the faculty listing. That just sounded like fun. I had to mention that for those of you who are in California. All right, moving on to our listener mailbag before we get on to the wonderful interview with Rat Bastard. I had a great time talking to him. Well, you'll see on the interview, but he had a very difficult situation, very difficult breakup, and he was kind enough to share very honestly how he did not deal well with the breakup at first, and then how he managed to adapt very nicely to a poly situation that was frankly really tough, and I imagine it would be really tough all around. But we had some great stuff in the listener mailbag. So first of all, we had this comment or a question actually from Jason in Virginia, and I love this. This is the only time I've really been able to hear his drawl. So here's Jason's question.
Hey Minx, how are you? This is Jason in Virginia. I'm just, I guess, talking in with a question, comment, whatever, about how to deal with those people who seem to think that if you're of the opposite sex, or even sometimes if you're of the same sex, that anything you say or do is some kind of weird come-on. And specifically, if you come out as poly, and you meet someone, you get to talk to them, you get along real well, you think they're pretty cool, pretty open-minded, and then you say something about being interested in poly, and all of a sudden everything you say becomes like you're hitting on them or something, and that's very frustrating because it can lead to losing someone that you thought was a good friend, or just awkwardness, or just silliness, even if you're interested, not interested in a person in a romantic fashion or whatever, that seems like everyone thinks you are. So my question is, how do other people deal with that sort of thing? How do you, good way to diffuse it or anything like that? But anyways, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.
So the question is basically, how do you come out as polyamorous without being a slut? Without sounding like you're a big slut? And for me, his question reminded me of, they have those t-shirts that say, yes, I'm, a kinky, switch, bisexual, polyamorous, and I'm still not interested in you. Or I still don't want to fuck you, or something like that. So if anybody, and it also sort of reminds me of, when people came out as gay, like especially if somebody of the same sex came out to you as gay, it wasn't unusual for the person to feel threatened. Like if, like when my friend Kimmy came out to me as lesbian, it was very easy to feel like, oh my gosh, it was threatening to me. Whereas when my gay friend came out, 5x5 guy came out to me, sophomore year of college, that was a little easier to deal with because it wasn't really threatening. He was opposite sex and only interested in the opposite sex. But I can see the issue with polyamory. I don't really have super great advice, and the Minx doesn't really give advice. So maybe for those of you, especially coming out, I think, as bisexual and or poly, really kind of in certain groups can come across as being just like, oh, you're a big whore, you're a big slut, you'll sleep with anyone. Not that that's a bad thing at all, but I can see how some people would take it that way. And actually, I know, come to think of it, that Fencer T has had issues with that. I made a little faux pas a few weeks ago when I mentioned to his SCA friends that he was polyamorous, and he was sitting there jabbing me, and I couldn't figure out why. And I talked to him afterwards, and I said, it's the SCA. Of course they're poly-friendly. And he's like, that's the problem. I don't want to be seen. He had sort of a reputation in the 90s as a, philanderer and womanizer. And he was afraid that if the SCA people knew that he was poly, then that reputation would be revived. And then women that wanted to sleep with him, but that he wasn't particularly interested in, would be hurt and offended, as in sort of along the lines of, well, gee, he'll sleep with anyone, but not with me, so I must be really horrible. So yes, I mean, Jason, I'm sort of rambling here, but basically it is an issue. All I can say is, I know I sort of sound like a broken record, but it's sort of what I've said before, that if you come into it, if when you're coming out to people and you sort of address the issue as being a sexual one, then people will be more likely to take it in a sexual way. If you present it more as a relationship orientation, or a lifestyle orientation, kind of like, yeah, like coming out as being gay, this is just who I am, this is just something that I do, and, more of in a political sort of social sense, then maybe it might be a little less likely that the person you're coming out to would think that you're hitting on her or on him. But I don't know, if anybody has advice or feedback, if any funny stories of this happening and you want to share them with listeners, hey, write into me, cunningminx, CUNNINGMINX @gmail.com, or why not call into our dusty listener comment line, area code 206-600-5677. Now, another topic that was brought up on the polyamory channel, I just had to read this. Asian wrote in the polyamory channel. I thought it was hysterical, so I had to read this short post. He said, has anyone or anyone's partner ever had a non-human element in their life that had to be treated like another relationship? Until just recently, I thought that I was in a V-style relationship. I love my boy, he loves his girl, but calculation of time spent leads me to realize that two of us have been seeing someone else behind each other's backs. World of Warcraft. Looking back, I see that before R came along, G and I pretty much split our free time in half. Half for our love, half for our addiction. Now, G's got a girlfriend too. His time just took another divide, and it's so like he picked up another SO. Unfortunately, unlike other triangle relationships, G, World of Warcraft, and I can't all spend time together at the same time. Plans to get a second computer, however, should remedy that and alleviate some of our scheduling troubles. Not to mention, I'll get to share something I like with someone I love, which is great. I just absolutely have to laugh because it makes me think of the analogies that I use when explaining to monogamous people why it is that I'm poly. It's the kind of thing and I very often use activities in that explanation, as in, well, let's say that you very much enjoy bowling, and you very much enjoy knitting, and you very much enjoy going to PTA meetings. And it's not that you like one more than the other, and it's not that you have to choose just one. If you love all three of those things equally and in different ways, then you just arrange your schedule and your life so that you have all three things so that you feel more fulfilled. And I usually use harmless things like bowling and knitting and whatnot. But I just have to say I really related to this World of Warcraft being an actual person, the addiction actually being a person within the relationship. All right, that's just a little bit of laughing. Okay, 2 more quick emails before we get to the interview with Rat Bastard. And this is about labels. And it is a rather long email, which I normally wouldn't read in its entirety, except that it's a very different point of view from what we've heard before. It's a little bit different from what we've talked about, so I wanted to read the whole thing. This was by Bad Snake, and she wrote in to say, first, let me thank you for all the work you're putting in to produce a podcast for polyamorous folks. I don't have a lot of contact with other poly people outside my own poly family unit, so it's refreshing to hear about others' views and life experiences. My letter is in response to your call for the various words and terms we use to label our poly partners. Deb and I began our poly life with another lesbian couple 8 years ago. I've called my partner, Deb, my wife for many years. And we finally made it official in Toronto last year, thanks to Canada for recognizing same-sex marriage. Grr, I'm so jealous. She calls me her wife as well. When we started seeing Jake and Sarah, we called them our girlfriends. Sometime between when we first started seeing them and when we moved into the house next door to them, they became our emergency backup girlfriends. The term is fun, a slight modification of Dave Barry's emergency backup dog, and signifies an added level of commitment to the relationship. Our emergency backup girlfriends are not only lovers, but are willing to fulfill the duties of a spouse, partner, primary when the primary can't. This ranges from airport pickups and pet care to taking your EBG to the hospital or being her shoulder to cry on when life throws a painful left hook. Jake has another lover who she used to call the side dish, a label that really speaks for itself. My additional lover, outside our core poly family, calls me her special friend. While on first use, this term has caused some of her friends to ask if I'm A, developmentally challenged, or B, imaginary. It's a way for her to keep me distinguished from the share a home and a life forever kind of girlfriend she hopes to find one day. I also want to throw in my opinion on the terms primary and secondary. I have no objection to them at all, and in fact, I believe that our poly family works better for having a hierarchy in place. My commitment to Deb holds priority, and Sarah understands and respects that because the same is true for her relationship with Jake. Deb and I have been together for more than 14 years. Huzzah! That's so wonderful. It's with her that I share the joys and mundane details of everyday life, responsibilities like house payments, credit card bills, and retirement planning, and her needs take priority when it comes to my time and attention. I don't think it's any slight to Sarah or my love for her to say that her role in my life is secondary to Deb's. Bad Snake, thank you so much for taking the time to write in. And it is good, and I really appreciate your doing that, because while I have issues with the secondary label, as you know, we've heard that before, it's simply because of the nature of my particular situation. And this is why I love encouraging you guys to write in, because what holds true for one poly relationship, apart from communication, everybody drink, is not necessarily true, will hold true for what works for somebody else's poly relationship. And thank you so much for sharing that particular configuration, so that maybe somebody listening says, hey, you know what? That would work for me. I'm going to copy her. Okay, one last comment. My buddy, 5x5 guy, wrote in about living honorably and Zen. This is based on last week's podcast about living honorably. And he writes in responding to someone's coming out statement, you gave some great suggestions about living ethically and honestly. One small point, though, caught my ear because it reminded me of something I've been reading in a tremendous book that combines spirituality, a lot of Buddhist philosophy, and how we create loving relationships. It's a book that purports to teaching you how to create spiritual relationships. Getting back to the comment that caught my ear, at one point you said the listener could try just being very honest, open, caring, and loving in your approach to coming out poly in hopes, and this is the point I'm quibbling with, in hopes that they will respond with the same. I think if we're going to try to be really zen about it, we have to let go of the hopes. You are honest and ethical and loving, period. Not in exchange for something, not in hopes of something, just because that is how you chose to be in the world. You could file that under one of those my 2 cents comments. And, 5x5 guy, I love that you keep me on track. Yeah, that's actually, if you want to go in a strictly Zen Buddhist sense of living honorably, that's absolutely true. That you live your life, choose to live it honorably according to your own ethics, your own values, your own beliefs, and there is not supposed to be the attachment to someone else acting a certain way. So thanks for calling me on the in hopes that they will respond with same. I have to say that I am human still. I do very much believe in Zen Buddhism, constantly strive to become more at peace with the world that swirls around me and to accept things that happen. But I'll admit, yeah, there's still a little bit of hope that, in choosing to live my life the way I do, that some of my choices might make it a little bit easier for someone else to communicate or share with me. So look at that. I'm a bad Buddhist. And coming up next, a listener, Rat Bastard, was kind enough to sit down with me over Skype and share some difficulties that he had with a breakup and then a makeup, but only with one member of the original poly triad. This is his story. And with us today is Rat Bastard, who, Minx, of course, never gives relationship advice, but he has said that he would share his experience with us about how breaking up is hard to do. So, Rat, may I call you Rat?
Absolutely.
Tell our listeners what happened, and then we'll get on to how you actually dealt with it.
Great. So, about 2 years ago, my wife and I became polyamorous. Now, we didn't really have the terminology at the time. What happened was we included an intimate sexual component in the relationship with our best friend. And they had some experience with non-monogamy before, and it was really our first time even thinking about that, and it became a really amazing relationship that we had for quite a while. And you talked before, Mix, about like being into polyamory before you knew there was such a thing, like finding the resources after the fact.
Yes.
And that was exactly what I did. And so, it seemed it seemed like we were the only people in the world doing this.
Yes, I do. If people write in and say that all the time, that I thought I was the only one, and it's just one of the glories of the internet that you can find people that are weird just like you.
Right, exactly. So, it went along for a while, and it was, so I should say who all was in the relationship. So it was me and my wife and another couple. Mainly, we were in the relationship with her. He is a submissive with, like, abandonment fantasies, right? So actually having her be polyamorous works great for him.
Ooh.
And, sort of. I mean, within certain contexts. We had to learn how to make it all work for him. But it really all worked. And the main people who were in the intimate relationship were the three of us. And
he was fantasizing about being abandoned by her, which worked for him.
Yeah. And he would be there sometimes, too. We kind of worked it out on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Okay, yes. So that's the setup.
That's the setup. And so then that went along for 6 or 8 months or so. And at some point, it stopped being satisfying. I'll just speak for myself. At some point, it stopped being satisfying for me. It became, I became very aware of my expectations and desires and how those weren't getting met. And I started being very, I know this now after the fact, right? At the time I didn't notice. But how I started acting was very needy and pressury.
Mm. And why? Do you know why you were acting that way?
Oh yeah, it was. That's just sort of where I go when it looks like I'm not getting my needs met.
Okay.
Like I revert to a very sort of a 5-year-old putting my foot down and pouting sort of way of relating to the world.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me. Okay.
Yeah. And then of course the effect of that is that boy do I not get what I'm doing now, right? So
you mean acting like a 5-year-old doesn't get you what you want, really?
Yeah, believe it or not, it actually doesn't. And so there was a lot of tension in the relationship for a while, and sort of the intimate part of it, certainly the sexual part of it, basically stopped for a while. Meanwhile, I was hating that and resenting that and busy, really being upset about that. And finally the time came when our lover, who I guess I'll call it D, the initial D.
Okay.
Had a conversation with me to say, I'm not attracted to you anymore. And
how did you take that?
That was devastating.
Mm.
Totally devastating. And in the same breath, she turned to my wife and said, "But I still want to be with you." And
what did you do?
I left. I actually couldn't be in the room at that moment.
Okay.
Probably the best thing to do.
You left the room, but not the relationship, correct?
Well, for a while I did leave the relationship.
Oh, really?
And for a while it was. I didn't talk to her for a while, a few weeks. I was in and out of being okay and not being okay. The next time I saw her, we really had a conversation. She, apologized for it having gone the way it went, and so did I, and really we were fine. And then the time after we saw her, I was a wreck again, and it totally didn't work, and so it really was a roller coaster for a while.
That sounds like it.
And somewhere in there, this is going to freak you out. I apologize in advance. But somewhere in there, I came across this podcast called Polyamory Weekly.
I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, what is he going to say? He had sex with a goat, and that made it all better.
No.
So I'm the pervert going straight to the goats. I'm sorry, continue.
Yeah, I'm not going to touch that. But really my first, really want you to know, I came across episode 3 or something. And it was my first realization that that there are people who feel the way I feel, the people that have the same beliefs about relationships and about love that I have. When we were negotiating the beginning of the whole thing, the drum I was beating was, I don't want there to ever be a finite amount of love in my life.
Oh.
And you said something really similar to that in the first episode of the show I downloaded, and I was like, wow, okay, all right, well, I've been a faithful listener ever since, but I've done, more looking and reading and all like that since then.
So you didn't know the word polyamory when you first started this sort of more open relationship with your wife, right? And you hadn't read The Ethical Slut or anything like that. No.
I had no idea that there were resources out there like that. I mean, I knew that people did this, I guess. I kind of I'd seen Real Sex as an episode about something like this, but, I didn't realize there was a community. I didn't realize there were resources like there are.
There are so many resources out there, it's true.
Oh, my God. Just when I started, I just plugged polyamory into Google and my job dropped. It's like, whoa, amazing, right? And
so how did you find the word, when did you first hear the word polyamory and say, oh my gosh, that's what I am?
I first saw it, I think I followed a link off of Fleshbot to an article by Violet Blue about adult-themed podcasts.
Oh, that one.
Long ago. Before, it was before the one that, you mentioned one several episodes later, and I was like, that already happened. So something happened even longer ago.
I was slow.
I don't know, episode 3 or something, 3 or 4.
Wow, and, you're right. I am kind of, taken aback.
Yeah.
So let's talk more about you, because I'm a little embarrassed now.
I knew that would freak you out.
And listeners, he didn't warn me that he was going to say this, so I'm really kind of. So tell me about this relationship continued. The woman that you guys were seeing together continued to see your wife as a lover, but stopped seeing you, and you're in that situation right now. Is that correct?
That's partially correct.
Okay.
We're in that situation right now, but I actually didn't allow it to be that way for quite a while.
Yeah, it sounded like you took a break first.
We did, and even our friendship with them took a hit. They were our best friends for a year before we had sex. And, even that relationship took a hit while I was sorting myself out about the whole thing. It was just really hard to be around her.
I can imagine.
And I was still friends. It was funny because my relationship with him was fine. We were still pals. But it was hard to be around her.
Well, yeah, because she'd said something that hurt you. So how did you get to the point where you could say, this is okay, go ahead and see my wife, I'm okay with this? How did you get to that point? Because you weren't for a while.
I wasn't for a while. Well, I wasn't for quite a long time. I've always been someone who was interested in expanding myself, challenging myself. And so the first time I let that happen, it really was like, all right, well, don't get too attached to this being a state of affairs, but let's see how it goes. And I really didn't know how I'd be about it. I was great about it, frankly. It wasn't easy. But what I did then and I continue to do is true myself up to what I'm really committed to. I have this automatic response, this 5-year-old left out, abandoned thing that I really am not committed to being. I'm not committed to operating from there.
Ah.
And what I am committed to is supporting my wife's sexual expression. My wife knew she was bisexual when she was 8, I think, and she told me about it the first 6 months of dating back freshman year of college. And she never had an opportunity to express that, explore that, and I'm really committed to her being fully expressed sexually. That's bigger for me than my, well, when I create it as bigger, it's bigger than my petty, need to be included, need to be important. And so what it's taken is continually reminding myself that that's really what I'm standing for, and that I'm going to have, Lord knows, I'm going to have emotional responses to things. And
of course.
That's actually perfectly fine. It's the most normal thing in the world, and I'm bigger than this.
I like that. It sounds like you said something that I was like, oh, okay, that's what it was. And I know we've talked about it on the show before. It is the desire for self-knowledge. You said you looked inside yourself and challenged, that you welcomed the challenge inside yourself. And yeah. I'm like, okay, that's what it was. It was that desire for self-knowledge, that desire to, find out what you're really about and why you act the way you do. And and then in that, it sounds like you found out that, hey, sure, I act like a 5-year-old sometimes, and that's not going to change. It's like me. I'm always like, I have abandonment issues. They're not going to change anytime soon, but I know they're there.
Right. Yep.
And you try not to let them rule your life.
Yeah, in fact, I'm really clear they would rule my life if I let them.
Oh, absolutely. I do know people whose issues like that rule their lives. I know people whose abandonment issues rule their lives so that they push everyone away, and then complain that they're abandoned.
Right. And then it's their fault.
So, hey, first of all, congratulations for doing the work. Everybody drink. Mink said do the work. So what advice would you give to somebody who is dealing with a difficult breakup, or, I'm sure there are others who are in the same situation as you, that...
Sure. Here's the deal. Well, it's a lot like the advice I give to somebody who's, like, mourning the death of a loved one. In a lot of ways it's really similar. You're mourning the loss of something. And what's really important to remember is that however you feel about that is fine. People get into a whole thing about, I shouldn't be upset, or I'm angry and I'm horrible for being angry. No, look, you're angry, right? Be where you are. It's actually okay. Explore that. Deal with those feelings. Know that it's all okay. Every feeling you have is temporary.
That's true.
And when you can give yourself the grace to just be where you're at, you start to get the freedom to be somewhere else. But when you try to fight where you're at, you stick there.
That's very Zen of you. That's very, live in the moment, accept everything for what it is. Don't cling to the past or to the future. Just, accept whatever comes.
Yeah, I've been doing some Zen study. It's made a huge difference. To know that, look, my feelings wash over me sometimes and they feel overwhelming, but it's just a feeling. It's not me, We all have this voice in our heads that talks to us all the time.
Yeah.
But that's you. We're the one listening to that. That's not you talking. You're listening.
I like what you said just now, that it was, it's a feeling, it's not me.
Yeah.
I like the idea that this is something I'm experiencing, and that's okay.
Yep.
To sound like, what's his name, Stuart Smalley from Saturday Night Live. And that's okay.
Right. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough.
Gosh darn it. People want to sleep with me. People like me. Because it's not about the sex. Well, is there any other advice or experiences that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah. I shared with you by email, and you actually read it. I was very flattered. My email about the first time I experienced trouble, right?
Oh, yes, I remember that. Yes.
And it was like, it was so cool because it wasn't at all about me. Like I was there having the experience of the joy of it, but it was the first time in this whole relationship, going back, I don't know, years now, right? That I could be for the people that I love, and make no mistake, I still love this woman madly. She's outside of her, she's my best friend. And to have the two of them so happy together and so clearly fulfilling something for each other, it was just incredible. It was just incredible. And again, that's the kind of feeling that the kind of feeling it works to manage for, like managing for that feeling. Because I know that's not my autumn. I'm going to wake up in the morning with different feelings. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is that you basically do the self-searching and the self-knowledge. In that the frubble is the goal. That it's not going to happen automatically right away, but sort of the motivation for dealing with the 5-year-old and the voices in your head is so that you can feel the frubble.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really takes sorting out, what reactions I'm having, whether that's something that I want to empower and have that be what gives me who I am right now. And it might be, like there are times that I'm going to choose to scream and scream and scream until I get my way.
Yes, you're going to be the 5-year-old sometimes. It's true.
Yeah, absolutely, right? But having done this work now, I'm really clear I'm choosing that when it happens. It doesn't take me over the same way it used to.
That's a really good point, that it's a choice. Sometimes we can give in to our emotions. And I personally, I agree with what you said before, that, if you're really angry, experience the anger. Just let it be. Don't try to fight it.
And be honest about it. Be honest that you're experiencing it. The other thing, so the two ways that I'm automatic is 5-year-old or fine.
Oh dear, not the fine.
Right? Oh, I'm totally fine. And I will lie about being angry in a heartbeat. I will just lie about it.
You know what FINE stands for, right?
Yes, I do.
What was it? Fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional.
I heard neurotic and edgy, but I like emotional too.
I think edgy is probably a little more negative, but yeah.
Maybe.
Well, Rat Bastard, thank you so much for sharing your story, your experiences, and your frubble with us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I got to tell you, I love this podcast. I think you are awesome and totally cute. And
I'm going to cut this part off because I get embarrassed, right? That's going to be edited right out.
Oh, fine. No strokes for you. No strokes for you.
All right, now that I said that, I have to leave it in. So. And thanks again to Rat Bastard for taking the time to share that story. Hope that was helpful for you guys out there in Polyland. Yeah, I'm making stuff up now. Polyland. Oh, and there was one more letter from the mailbag I neglected to mention earlier, but it actually kind of goes in with something that Rat Bastard had said. Woodrant wrote in to say that he found my podcast through Violet Blue's podcast. And I have to say, by the way, welcome to all our new listeners, and thank you so much for you guys who are taking the time to write in and say, hey, I just found it, I really like it, and here's why. I love that, and it really helps me better choose content for the show. And a special welcome to our Violet Blue listeners that are continuing to trickle in. I'm so glad that Flushbot and Violet Blue both decided to mention Polyamory Weekly. And Woodrant wrote in about discovering poly and writes, I started listening to your podcast based on a list of podcasts on Flushbot. I found myself on Flushbot because I've been listening to Violet Blue's podcast. I'm so happy I found your podcast. I've been in a polyamory relationship for years, but I didn't know it. Well, sort of. And he goes on to describe a relationship that wasn't quite swinging, and it actually was polyamorous, but because of a lack of poly resources and poly networking groups in that particular area, it's only through the grace of Flushbot and the internet that he found out, oh, wait a minute, there's a word for it. It's polyamory, and look at all these resources I can find. And he also provided some interesting comments on swinging versus poly, but I want to save those comments for an upcoming show. I will mention that I did do some media training with Susan Wright of National Coalition for Sexual Freedom, and it was so wonderfully useful that we are going to arrange to have her come on the show and talk about tips for coming out as polyamorous. And the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom has been talking about sort of official, non-offensive ways to distinguish between polyamory and swinging. So we're going to save those comments for a future show. Also, BN wrote a very wonderful email about polyamory and Christianity versus faith that I'm also going to save for an upcoming show, because there is a listener who has been writing wonderful things in his journal about poly versus faith, and I decided instead of reading from his journal, we're going to get together and actually have him as a guest on the show. So really great stuff coming up. Again, questions, comments, feedback, email me at cunningminx@gmail.com, or hey, why not call the listener comment line at area code 206-600-5677. Or you can always just record an MP3 and attach that to your email like Jason did. Be happy to play that on the show for you. Show notes will be up soon at the Polyamory Weekly blog page at www.livejournal.com/users/polyweekly. Coming up on next week's show, we're going to have an interview and discussion regarding polyamory, Christianity, faith, and spirituality and ethics. Lots of fun, so be sure to tune in next week. Welcome to our new listeners from Fleshpot and Violet Blue, and welcome back to our return subscribers. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for listening, everyone. This is Minx signing off, and remember, it's not all about the sex.